I'm supposed to start in 1 Samuel chapter 27. And I consider 1 Samuel chapter 27 one of the most disturbing chapters in the book of Samuel. I don't know if you see it that way or not. To me, it's as disturbing as the chapter when David has adultery with Bathsheba. It's in the sense that David goes off course completely of what he should be doing, and then it's going to end up with some consequences that doesn't show up for a couple of chapters. So in order to help us understand what's going on here, I want to jump back to the 15th chapter for just a moment. And I'm just going to hit a few verses from chapter 15 all the way up to the 27th chapter to try to set the context for what's been going on. This is going to be a time period, and I've looked at various chronologies of this, and it's anywhere from 12 to 15-year time period is kind of a guess. We don't know exactly. We're going to start with when in the 15th chapter, when God rejects Saul as being king. And in the 15th chapter, in verse 35, it says, Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death, for Samuel grieved over Saul, and the Lord regret having made Saul king over Israel. In 16 verse 1, it says, Now the Lord said to Samuel, How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and gold, and I will send you to Jesse to Bethlehem, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons. So beginning here, we're going to look at a transition of the leadership or the kingship of the nation of Israel. Now, a lot of times the transition of the kingship is overnight. To kill a king and somebody else comes in. This is going to be a 15-year transition from Saul to David. And during this time, Saul is still going to be on the throne, but he's going to be on the throne without God. Everything Saul does is going to turn sour. And he's going to want God's help, and he's not going to get God's help. And so I just want to say that's where we start. Now, we know in the first few years of David being, Samuel does go and anoint David to be king. So David knows from this point that he is going to be king over Israel. And we've seen several things we've looked at that David has recognized, but David's not going to kill Saul, get there. Everything goes along pretty well until we get to the battle when the Philistines come up and Goliath challenges them, and Saul's unwilling to go out, and David goes out, and of course David kills Goliath, and then David helps the army rout the Philistines. And in 1 Samuel 18 and verse 7, this song appears. Now, I want us to notice this song because it becomes significant over the next few chapters. The women sang as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Then Saul became very angry, for this saying displeased him, and he said, they've ascribed to David 10,000, but to me they've ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So now Saul has two enemies in his mind. He has the Philistines and he has David. And we've seen several chapters where he is either pursuing the Philistines whenever the Philistines come to invade, or when he's not pursuing the Philistines, he's pursuing David because he sees them both as his enemies. And so in 1 Samuel, the 21st chapter now, Saul has been pursuing David. This is after all the events, he throws a spear at David to try to pin him to the wall, and David and Jonathan make the pact. And this is in the 21st chapters when David has gone up. He's fleeing from Saul, and he's gone up to Nob. to Ahimelech the priest, and he's gotten the bread, the showbread. And he's got some men with him, and David's eating that. And Saul is pursuing him heavily. We know that Saul kills the priest up there at Nob. And so in the 10th verse of the 21st chapter, then David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now, can you think of a less likely place for David to flee? Gath was the hometown of Goliath. It was a Philistine city, one of the major cities of the Philistines. I don't know why David chose Gath, but it might be the perspective of if your enemy's enemy is your friend. Maybe that's the way it was. Achish was Saul's enemy, so David perhaps felt like he could find sympathetic there. But he goes down there, and I want to see in verse 10 the song. Achish's servants in verse 11, but the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of this one as they danced, saying, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? The song shows up. This is David's reputation. And you notice that other phrase in there? He said, he's the king. So David has a reason, I guess, to fear Saul, because Saul is going to try to exterminate him, because Saul sees David as a threat, both being a more powerful soldier because God is with him. God is not with Saul. And David has been anointed king, and it's common knowledge. If the Philistines know that David's going to be the king, it's common knowledge in Israel and Philistia. And so David goes to Gath, and I'll get my pointer out here, use my map for something. And he comes down to Gath, which is the Philistine city here, and Achish rejects him because of the song. And so David leaves Gath and comes back up here to Adullam in Judah and collects a lot of people to him. And then he leaves Adullam and takes his family and all the men's family over to Moab, leaves the family there, and he comes back to what's called the stronghold, which is probably a cave or cliff area down on the border of Moab and Israel. And since it's called the stronghold, it's like a fortress down there. Some have suggested perhaps he even went to Masada. But he goes to the stronghold, a safe place that he could stay. And I want us to look at now to the 22nd chapter. David is hiding out in the stronghold. It says, the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold, depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. David was the anointed king of Judah, of Israel. His job as anointed king was to provide protection for the people. He had been doing that as a part of Saul's army. He was a leader in Saul's army. He had been doing that, but because his conflict with Saul, he got afraid and became derelict in his duties. He tried to escape. He took his family. First, he went down to the Philistines, and he went over to the Moabites, and then went and hid down in the stronghold. The prophet of God comes to him and says, get back in Judah where you belong. You're the king of Judah. I don't know if that's exactly the way he said it, but that seems to be what the prophet is saying to David. Then David goes back to Judah, and we're going to see the next section. David is doing what I perceive he should have been doing all along. He's protecting the people of Judah. In the 23rd chapter of 1 Samuel, we've looked at these stories. The Philistines come up and they plunder the threshing floors of Keilah. David comes and rescues them and Keilah, and then the people of Keilah betray him. They're willing to turn him over to Saul. Saul's heard he's there. He's coming. And David asked the Lord, will they turn me over? The Lord said, yes. So they betray David, so he has to leave Keilah. Then shortly after that, Keilah was a Jewish city or a Hebrew city, a city of Judah. The Ziphites. Keilah is up in this area, up in here. And the Ziphites lived in this area. They also betray David. They are also Jewish people or Hebrews. They betray David and they send word to Saul, he's down here. Come get him. And so that's when Saul comes down and David's hiding in the cave at En-Gedi. And we have that event where, Saul comes in to relieve himself and David cuts off his garment and then comes out and reveals himself to Saul. So Saul was in immediate proximity of David. Then we get into the 24th. Well, I want to make a note here. God does deliver David. I want to focus on or just recognize that. Then in chapter 25, we have that account of Nabal and Abigail. Well, what was David doing? Basically, he was protecting the people up here, Carmel, which is up here in this area. He was protecting the people of Carmel, and Nabal was very, he had no gratitude for that. He rejected David as one who would be a leader. And so David is being rejected by the people. Then following that, we have the occasion of where Saul is camping down here in the south somewhere, looking for David, and Saul seems to be in the plain, and David's up hiding in the rocks with his men. He looks down over the Saul's camp and sees them, and all of Saul's camp goes fast asleep. The Lord is, best I can tell, the Lord has put them to sleep. David goes down and gets with Saul's water bottle and his spear. We have here this close encounter again with David and Saul. And so if you're looking at it from strictly the human perspective or David's perspective, everything, he cannot escape Saul, and the people are rejecting him. That's what we've seen in these last few chapters we've been studying this. We come to chapter 27 and verse 1. Then David said to himself, now I will perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Saul then will despair of searching for me any more in all the territory of Israel, and I will escape from his hand. David's focus becomes escape from Saul, not protecting the people of Judah. And so his solution to the escape from Saul is that he's going to go down to the Philistines down here at Gath. He's been down to Gath once before, and they rejected him, and David, I didn't mention earlier, he played the fool so they wouldn't harm him, and Achish just said, well, that's a fool, I don't worry about him. Well, this is some years later, I don't know, 6 or 8, maybe even 10 years later than the first trip to Gath. He comes down again, but deception worked the first time. He's going to have a new form of deception the second time. Rather than playing the fool, he's going to play like he's a Philistine, which is the opposite of what he is. He is the anointed of God, of the kingdom of God. And so his job, his role is to protect the children of Israel. And now he's going to go play like he's a Philistine so that he can be protected from Saul. So I'm going to read the next few verses here. Now David said to him, I will perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Saul then will despair of searching for me any more in all the territory of Israel. I will escape from his hand. So David arose and crossed over he and his 600 men who were with him, to Achish, the son of Moab, the king of Gath. And David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each with his household, even David with his 2 wives, and Hanam and the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the Carmelitess, Nabal's wife. Now it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he no longer searched him. Mission accomplished. Saul is not looking for me. David has moved all of his people and all of his family and their families. Now they're at Gath. What is an Israelite doing living in a Philistine community? We remember how bad that was whenever old guy with the long hair, Samson went down amongst the Philistines. It was a disaster for him. David is now living among the Philistines, but what could he possibly have said to Achish to convince Achish he was not the man who had killed 10,000 Philistines? We had to deceive him to think that the song was no longer true. And so I think we're going to see, and I've been talking about deceit, but we're going to see in the rest of the chapter how David deceives Achish. Then David said to Achish, if I now have found favor in your sight, let them give me a place in one of the cities in the country, that I may live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you? So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah all this day. So now this is Gath is up here. He gives him a city down here on the border of Philistia and Judah. That border is kind of flexible because when Joshua came in, they took Ziklag. But sometime, apparently after Joshua and the people came in, the Philistines took Ziklag back. And now it's in the Philistine control. So David gets that. I suggest David wanted to put some distance between himself and Achish so he could operate the way he wanted to operate without being under the scrutiny. I don't think David had changed his heart. He had changed in pretense, had changed his actions. He had become a Philistine in pretense. Now, this is not going to turn out good for David, but this is the course that David has done. And I think the first reason for that is he had said in his heart, what shall I do? He did not ask God, should I go down to Gath? David made a decision on his own based on his circumstances of the things we talked about, of the people rejecting him and Saul continuously pursuing him. Okay. So he was there in Ziklag, and then it says the number of days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was a year and 4 months. Any thoughts here before we get into this last part of this chapter? Really gets into the deception of David. And I think that deception really starts in verse 1 to get Achish to accept him, and now he's going to prove through this deception that he is a true servant of Achish, and he has adopted the Philistine ways. And when I say the Philistine ways, we've seen in previous these chapters, the Philistines commonly go out and raid the Israelites, just like the threshing floor, and get whatever they could and bring it back themselves. So now David becomes a raider. Let's look at verse 8 through 12. Now David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites, for they were inhabitants of the land from ancient times, as you come to Shur, even as far as the land of Egypt. David attacked the land and did not leave a man or a woman alive. He took away the sheep, the cattle, the donkeys, the camels, and the clothing. Then he returned and came to Achish. Now Achish said, where have you made a raid today? And David said, against the Negev of Judah, against the Negev of Jeremites, and against the Negev of Kenites. David did not leave a man or a woman alive to bring to Gath, saying, otherwise they will tell about us, saying, so has David done, and so has been the practice all the time he has lived in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying, he has surely made himself odious among his people, Israel, therefore he will become my servant forever. So going back and looking at that section there, just a little zoom in on the map there. Ziklag is here, Gath is there, and David is going down and he's raiding the area on the way to Shur, which would be this area in southern, or the Negev of Judah, the southern portion of Judah. And the people he's been raiding, let's look at the people he's been raiding down, or he raids, the Geshurites, Girzites, and the Amalekites. Now, the Amalekites are on the south border here, so he must have crossed over some there. But this area down here is kind of I guess we say like the Wild West. It's whoever's got the most control controls it. And these nations, the Geshurites, is mentioned in Joshua, when they came into the land, as people that they did not drive out. So they are Canaanites that they didn't drive out. We can't trace the Girzites very well because they're not mentioned by that name. They're probably another group who lived in the south that did not get driven out. They are probably more sympathetic with the Philistines than they are the Israelites. I want us to notice that. So David is kind of remaining true to his heart. He's not attacking Judah. He's attacking the people who are from Canaan. And I guess he could say he's on his mission for God to clear the people from the land. And maybe how David justified. But you know, as David, how many people does he save? He doesn't save anybody. And the reason why he doesn't save anybody, he says in verse 11, said, David did not leave a man or a woman alive to bring to Gath, saying, otherwise they will tell about us, saying, so has David done. He did not want the people of these Canaanite communities coming back to Achish and said, our community is the one he raided. The deception that David gave was back up here in verse 10. Now Achish said, where have you made a raid today? And David said, against the Negev of Judah. Well, what's the Negev of Judah? That's the southern border of Judah where some of the Jewish people were living. Some of the Hebrews were living. They all said against the Negev of Judah's here, the Negev of Jeremites. That's a family out of Judah's descendants. They're living along the south. He said, we've been here. And up here, the Negev of the Kenites. So I've been in the south country, and so these people may have been closely associated. He attacked, living closely with these, but he did not attack any of the Jewish people or the Hebrew people. He attacked the Canaanite people. So he is, and you see the conclusion that Achish comes to is, he has surely made himself odious among his people Israel. If David's been over there attacking the Hebrews, then he is going to be odious to them. And so now Achish is satisfied that David has become a true Philistine in character and nature. The other thing I want us to notice is, the other thing that David seems to be doing is bribing Achish because David attacked the land in verse 9 and did not leave a man or woman alive, and he took away the sheep, the cattle, the donkeys, the camels, and then he returned and came to Achish. It seems he brought the plunder to Achish because he is now serving under Achish. He's enriching Achish. So Achish he's got him a new person that's bringing him plunder. So That's why I consider David's actions here as reprehensible. He is a servant of God who is to be protecting the children of God, and for personal gain or protection, he turns to the enemy and begins to act like the enemy, and he goes out and has these murderous raids. Now, that's kind of my perception of what's going on here. David kind of sinks to, this is very similar to what happened with Bathsheba and Uriah. Some thoughts here. Yes.
So David had the faith earlier to kill Goliath. He knows he's going to be king. He doesn't want to do anything to Saul because Saul's important. Does David just not want to engage Saul?
I assume it says but David was afraid for his life. So I think fear overtakes David. And he did not want to engage Saul. Now, hopefully we can move along here. I think you're exactly. David had enough, and I'm glad you brought that up. David had at least 4 pieces of information at his disposal that he was going to be king. Samuel had anointed him that you're going to be king. So David should have taken that and said, Saul's not going to kill me. He had twice been delivered in Saul's presence, miraculously. And then the prophet Gad had told him to stay out of foreign countries, go back to Judah where you belong. God had told him to go back to Judah. So David had all the information he needed to stay in Judah, but he allowed fear. And that's why I think verse 1, when he says, there's nothing better for me to do than to escape into the land of the Philistines. The people are rejecting me. Saul's chasing me. Even though God says I need to stay here, I need to leave. Now that is a classic situation ethics. Have any of us ever used situation ethics? My situation is such that I need to do this even though I should be doing that. I think that's what's happened with David here. Other thoughts, and I appreciate your comments there. Okay, now, there's no break in the story until we get to 2 Samuel chapter 1. So it's a shame we can't have the whole day to go through this, get all the way to 2 Samuel chapter 1. I know we're not going to get there, but this is a continuous, and it's continuous flowing from the perspective. We have David is the main character, and Saul is the other main character. We've had this discussion of where David gets himself in a pickle. He gets himself in a fix because we're going to see in chapter 28, verse 1 and 2. We'll go ahead and read that. Now it came about in those days that the Philistines gathered their armed camps for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, know assuredly that you will go out with me in the camp, you and your men. And David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. So Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. Achish, as it says back up in the previous chapter, he believed David. He thought David had become a Philistine. He's willing to take him to war against the Israelites. That's how Achish has been deceived by this. Now, it's interesting, I think David kind of hedges his words here when he says, he says, you go with me to fight. And David said to him, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. He didn't commit to fight the Israelites, but he said, you know what I can do, because I've been bringing all this plunder back to you. You know how powerful I am and my men. And so that kind of stops. I don't know why the chapter break was right there. It needed to continue down to verse 2 for that thought in chapter 27. Now then we have this insert. Any other thoughts here? We're going to look at this next section here. We have an insert here in chapter 28. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him and buried him in Ramah his own city, and Saul had removed from the land those who were mediums and spiritists. So the writer here gives us a piece of background information. Samuel was dead, so the prophet that Saul had always depended upon, even though some 15 years earlier, Samuel had turned his back on Saul and would never speak to him again because God had turned his back on Saul. But Saul would normally try to find Samuel. So Samuel's not there, and the mediums that they had been using, the superstition, the conjurers, the Levitical law in Leviticus 8:19, Leviticus 20, and Deuteronomy 18. A part of the law was the command to exterminate all of them and get them, all the idolaters and all the mediums, to get them out of the country. So from that perspective, Saul has done his job as a king to exclude them from the nation of Israel. Then go back to the verse 4. So the Philistines gathered together and came and camped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they camped at Gilboa. Now just think about David here. David's going to be following along with Achish. They're going to be marching toward Jezreel, the Jezreel Valley, where they're going to engage Saul. What's the last thing that David wants to do? Kill the Lord's anointed. That's the fix that David's gotten himself into, because he has become, in their sight, a Philistine. And so Saul saw the camp of the Philistines. He was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, neither by dreams or by Urim or prophets. And Saul said to the prophets, or to his servants, seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servant said to him, behold, there is a medium in Endor. I'm going to see if I can get that slide over here, because the action now is going to move to the north. Mount Carmel is up here. This is the Jezreel Valley, which is a beautiful valley. It runs across. Aphek, we don't know exactly where it is. It's somewhere along this red line where the Philistines Gath was down here. So all of them are gathering into a force here, going to march up here to the Jezreel Valley. They're going to end up at Shunem. And the Israelite was Saul, and his troops are going to be here at Jezreel. And it's sort of like the time when David and the army came out, and the Philistines with Goliath came. One camped on one side, one camped on the other side of the stream there, trying to engage each other in battle. That seems to be what is getting ready to happen here. So we're marching up here, and Saul sees them coming. I don't know where he's got traffic cameras out on the internet, but he sees the army coming, and so he knows it's going to be tough. And so God will not, I don't know how many times he prayed or he pleaded, but he gets no answer, because God has quit talking to Saul. And so he asks for a medium. Why does he ask for a medium? Pardon? He needs to find an answer, right? And God won't give him an answer. Well, why would you ask for a medium? They can't do anything. They're not God. And that's why they were put out. They were like idols. They were false representatives of God. They did not represent God. But Saul, in desperation, wants an answer from God. Now, he's already got his answer from Samuel some 15 years ago. His answer is, you're going to lose the kingdom. But now he sees the army coming, and he begins to plead. So, we find this medium who is at Endor. So the Philistines are going to camp here. Saul's going to camp here. And Endor is just around the backside of the hill of Moriah from where the Philistines are camping. And so there's a medium or a witch there at Endor. In verse 8, then Saul disguised himself of putting on outer clothes, and went he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night, and he said, conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you. But the woman said to him, behold, you know that Saul has done. Now he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you laying a snare for my life, and to bring about my death? Saul vowed to her by the Lord, saying, as the Lord lives, no punishment will come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? And he said, bring up Samuel for me. Now Samuel was obviously very famous, because this witch knew immediately who he was talking about, and it identified who Saul was. She knew that Samuel and Saul had much interaction. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. Saul's the master of deception here. David was the master of deception. Now Saul is the master of deception. He's deceiving this woman so he can get what he wants. I just think that's interesting. Both of them are failing and using deception to get what they want. The king said to her, do not be afraid, but what do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. Now, I don't know exactly what she saw, but she saw something that apparently was supernatural looking. It was not a natural looking thing. And he said to her, what is his form? And she said, an old man coming up. He is wrapped with a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. How did she bring Samuel up? How did she bring Samuel up? Was that something she could conjure somebody up? He came up. It's obviously Samuel. He's going to talk with him. I think Eddie?
It has to be the hand of God.
Yes, it would.
Satan has the power to go and get Samuel, but he's in God's care.
God's the only one that can reveal anything from the dead, can bring something up. So God is now he's going to give Saul a message. Saul, he has quit talking to Saul, but he's going to give him a message. It's going to end up being the same message. It's not going to be a new message. It's not going to be your escape or is how you get out of this. Saul was looking for a way to escape the Philistines. Is what he was really looking for, and save himself and his. But as Eddie says, the only one who raised Samuel up, presented him. I don't know what kind of form he had. It apparently looked like the old man Samuel when he died. He had a robe on, and Saul immediately recognizes him as Samuel. I think the lady is probably very surprised at what has occurred here. So then 15 through 19, then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? That's a good question. And, sometimes we wish that our past relatives would come back alive. If they're at peace with God, it's hard for me to say now. It's probably better just to leave them alone. And I think that's what Samuel's saying. He's at peace with God. Why have you tried to interfere with what God has done? To bring me up. And Saul answered, I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me. And God has departed from me and no longer answers me either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore, I have called you that you may know, make known to me what I should do. Has Saul ever listened to Samuel? What makes Saul think he's going to listen to Samuel this time? He's never listened to Samuel before. And that's why God quit sending the message to him through the prophets or the Urim or the priest or the prophets. Because he wouldn't listen. And so, but he says, I'm a, okay, any thoughts there? God has departed from you and no longer has pardoned me and no longer. So Saul recognized that God has quit answering him. And so he's a desperate. And he's expecting now Samuel will have something to tell him. Well, where did Samuel get everything that he told Saul to start with? Got it from God. He was a prophet. And so if the prophets, if Gad, we know Gad is there because he talked to David. If the priest has still got to Urim, and we know they did because at that time, which was a way they could inquire of God. If none of that was responding, what makes him think that Samuel's going to be able to respond? Because Samuel responds with what God says. And I think that's important. But he is at his wit's end. He sees disaster coming. God won't help him, and he's trying to plan his way out of it. In verse 16, Samuel said, why then do you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary? The very thing we don't want is for God to be our adversary. So that lets Saul know there's no escape if God is his adversary. The Lord has done according as he spoke through me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor, to David. As you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Therefore, tomorrow your sons will be with me. Indeed, the Lord will give over the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. The message he didn't want. There's no hope for you, Saul. That's the new piece of information he got. He knew the Lord was not with him, but now he knows that tomorrow is going to be his life. It's going to be over. Okay, thoughts through there. Okay, we'll read the rest of the chapter here. Then Saul immediately fell full length upon the ground and was very afraid because of the words of Samuel. Also, there was no strength in him, for he had eaten no food all day and all night. The woman came to Saul and saw that he was terrified and said to him, behold, your maidservant has obeyed you, and I have taken my life in my hand and have listened to your words, which you spoke to me. So now also please listen to the voice of your maidservant, and let me set a piece of bread before you, that you may eat and have strength when you go on your way. But he refused and said, I will not eat. However, his servants, together with a woman, urged him, and he listened to them, so he arose from the ground and sat on the bed. The woman had a fatted calf in the house, and she quickly slaughtered it, and they took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread from it. She brought it before Saul and his servants, and they ate, and they arose and went away by night. So they go back around the hill, back over to the other side of the stream, to Jezreel in their camp, preparing for morning when the army is going to be routed by the Philistines. Okay. Okay, any other thoughts there? Well, I know we're not going to have time to look at all of chapter 29, but I think I want to share one thing with you of chapter 29. Chapter 29 now jumps back to look at David and his involvement in this. In chapter 29, and it's probably, chapter 29 is chronologically probably precedes chapter 28, because what's happened in chapter 28 occurs up in this region. What happens here in chapter 29 occurs down here at Aphek. And the lords of the Philistines are gathering together and organizing by the hundreds and thousands, getting ready to march up to Jezreel Valley. In verse 3, the commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" Achish had brought 600 Hebrews along. And the rest of the Philistine lords said, "Why you got them here? They haven't been deceived like Achish has. Is this not David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, who has been with me these days, but rather these years, and I have found no fault in him from the day he deserted to me on this day?" So Achish says, he deserted to me, and I haven't found any fault with him. He's raided southern Judah and brought me all this stuff. But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. The commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Make the man go back, that he may return to his place where you have assigned him, and do not let him go down to the battle with us. For in the battle he may become an adversary to us. For with what could this man make himself acceptable to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of these men?" And then the song. Is this not David, of whom they sing in the dances, saying, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s." The song saves David, because the Philistines now reject David going with them. David's greatest fear of having to go in battle against Saul is alleviated because he's sent back down, all the way back down to Ziklag, where he'd been. God intervenes to keep David from doing something atrocious. Even though David has made lots of mistakes, God is still with David. He's not with Saul. He lets Saul go into the battle and be killed, but he gets David out of the fray and sends him back down to Ziklag. Now, come back next week, because it's not going to be pretty when he gets to Ziklag. It's going to be part of the consequence of his sin of getting involved with the Philistines. Thank you all.